I'm here to talk about the nominee, Ms. Kagan, for the Supreme Court, but I thought I would put it in context of how I view what we are doing. As a physician, a father, and a grandfather, taking a look at where we are as a nation, it's very worrisome to me. The 62 years that I've lived have been fraught with great opportunity, great challenges, but never with a fear that what we have in this country may not last. I have to admit to my colleagues that I have that fear now. And it's not an unfounded fear. You see, this year we'll borrow from our grandchildren almost $1.6 trillion. We'll borrow in excess of $4 billion a day, money that we don't have. We, at this moment, owe $13.35 trillion. No question, we are the biggest economy in the world, being fast caught by other large economies. The uniqueness of the American experiment could have been predicted by those who studied republics, because freedom and liberty were the basis for such an explosion in both growth and wealth and freedom and standard of living. The poor in our country live far in excess of half the world's populations because of the great republic we are. We have, I believe, a short period of time to right the ship for our country. We have large disagreements in this body on how we do that, and their ideas have as much value as mine. But it's not debatable the kind of trouble we're in as a nation. It's indisputable. We have a mountain of debt, and we're going to have interest costs that are going to chew up our freedom, chew up our children's prosperity and opportunity over the years that lie ahead of us. So we have great responsibility as we place somebody on the Supreme Court. And our constitutional responsibility is to advise and either give consent or not give consent. I have no doubts that my speech on the floor this afternoon will change any senator's mind. It won't. But what I hope to do is to lay out the questions as we put Ms. Kagan on the court, where we'll be with the basis of her philosophy. I've served on the Judiciary Committee for almost 6 years. I've been through 4 Supreme Court justice hearings. I've met with more than 4 prospective nominees to the Supreme Court. And the responsibility is heavy. Elections do have consequences. It gives the President of the United States the right to appoint, with advice and consent, all the judges in this country, as well as numerous other officials. But none is greater and none is more important than a Supreme Court justice. And my concern with Ms. Kagan is whether or not she really believes in what our Constitution says. And by her own words, she fails to meet that test. And I think it's time for an extra parameter to be considered in light of the difficulties we face in when we give consent on somebody who's going to be in a lifetime position that I believe will have negative consequences for our future. And I'm going to spell out why I believe that. She is a highly qualified woman who has attained much in her young life. She's highly intelligent, highly articulate, and quite pleasant. And I believe she did the best job of at least letting us get to see some of what she thinks of any of the Supreme Court nominees that we've had. And I give her credit for that. But what I saw causes me to shake in my boots. And let me tell you why. Two critical statements that she made. She believes that Supreme Court precedent trumps the original intent of our founders. Now think about that for a minute. We just heard the senator from Delaware mention Brown versus Board of Education. Under that philosophy, reaching back to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, Brown versus Board of Education would never happen under the Supreme Court. We would have had separate but equal had we relied on Supreme Court precedent and not the underlying body of our Constitution. As I was reading recently, I came across something written by Calvin Coolidge, and he's not very often quoted in this body. And for some of that, I understand why. But one of the other things that nominee Kagan refused to embrace in her testimony before the committee was natural rights. And you see, the whole foundation for our country is based on the fact that the rights we have are not given to us by the Congress of the United States or the government of the United States or the Constitution of the United States. They are inherently ours. They're inalienable rights. The right of life, the right of liberty, the right to pursue happiness. We have a government to be a caretaker to ensure that our rights are not infringed upon. So, lacking that understanding, and it wasn't just once that she was asked that. She was asked that in terms of Blackstone's principles on the right of individual to defend their life. She does not embrace that concept. It was not only evident in her plain words that she spoke, but in her answers indirectly to other questions. So we're going to have a Supreme Court nominee that believes that the wisdom of men today, outside of the Constitution, based on precedent, trumps the wisdom that was brought forth by our forefathers in both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. There are other proofs for this, and I'll go through in my talk to explain those. But listen to what Calvin Coolidge had to say. About the Declaration, there is finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter or the Constitution that followed it, because if all men are created equal, That is final. It can't be improved upon. It can only be lessened. If all men are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. It cannot be improved upon. It can only be lessened. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. The power of the United States government comes from the power that we loan to the government as people and citizens of the United States. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he or she can proceed historically is not forward, but backward toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, and no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the Revolutionary Fathers. Well said, Calvin Coolidge. Well said. So we have before us a judge who said the following statements to me during our hearing. To be honest with you, I don't have a view of what are natural rights independent of the Constitution. Oh, really? So we're going to have a Supreme Court justice who has no view of what our inalienable rights are other than what the Constitution says? Where can that take us? It can take us anywhere she wants to go, outside the bounds of the very liberties that we loan to the government to have a civil society. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. Why aren't they self-evident to her? Why doesn't she hold an opinion on them? That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We have inalienable rights. We have natural rights. And we're about to put a justice on the Supreme Court for life, who by her own words does not have a view of what are natural rights. I don't know anybody who's an adult in this country who doesn't have a view of what they think are their natural rights. In some cases, original intent is unlikely to solve the question. This is a quote from Elena Kagan. And that might be because the original intent is unknowable, or might be because we live in a world that's very different from the world in which the framers lived. In many circumstances, precedent is the most important thing. You know, that's just the opposite of what Coolidge had to say about the Declaration of Independence. Just exactly the opposite. More modern. We got it right. Natural rights don't matter. Our wisdom, our intellect